Snow blew across the Ohio porch, freezing against the 2 suitcases Laura held, while her 4- and 6-year-old daughters shivered against her legs. Evelyn opened the front door, looked down at her grandchildren, and shook her head. "There's no room for them here," Evelyn said. "You can stay alone." The deadbolt clicked shut. Laura didn't pound on the wood. She didn't drop the suitcases, and she didn't let her hands tremble when she pulled her collar tighter around her neck. She just took both children by the hand, walked back down the icy driveway, and buckled them into the back seat of her 10-year-old sedan. She turned the ignition, waited for the old engine to catch, and pulled out into the storm, without once looking back at the house. Evelyn figured that closed door was the end of it. She had no idea that 5 years from now, an $85,000 default would land on an executive underwriting desk, and Laura would be the one holding the paperwork. The morning after that storm, Laura had $700 in a checking account and a rusted Buick with a heater that only blew lukewarm air. She leased a 400-square-foot studio apartment right above a 24-hour commercial laundromat on the edge of town. Every night around 9, the floorboards vibrated from the heavy-duty spin cycles downstairs, a low, constant hum that rattled the kitchen table. The apartment had 1 bedroom. Laura put 2 twin mattresses on the floor for the girls and took the pull-out sofa by the front door for herself. In January, the thermostat stuck at 62 degrees. She taped bubble wrap over the single-pane windows to keep the draft off the kids' beds and bought their groceries off the clearance rack at the back of the discount market: bruised apples, day-old bread, and generic macaroni. By day, she worked as an entry-level title clerk at a regional mortgage branch downtown. Her job was mechanical and invisible, checking parcel numbers, verifying county plat maps, and flagging missing signatures for $12.50 an hour. She wore the same 2 wool skirts on rotation, dry cleaning them in the coin-op machines downstairs when she could spare the quarters. Every afternoon at 4:30, she picked the girls up from a subsidized daycare run out of a church basement, fed them dinner at 5:30, and had them asleep by 7. That was when the real work started. At 7:15, Laura cleared the crayons off the Formica kitchen table and opened a second-hand textbook on commercial finance. Under the yellow glare of a single overhead bulb, she taught herself how money actually moved. She studied amortization schedules, debt-to-income ratios, and risk assessment formulas until her eyes burned. While the industrial dryers downstairs shook the floor, she learned how banks evaluated default risk, what triggered a commercial foreclosure, and why certain loans were doomed before the ink ever dried on the promissory note. She never missed a shift at the branch. Within 8 months, she spotted an error on a municipal zoning title that would have cost the firm $40,000 in fines. Her supervisor didn't give her a bonus, but he gave her a promotion to junior loan processor and a $2 raise. Across town, Evelyn was living a very different kind of winter. The 4-bedroom house on Elm Street was paid off, a clean brick colonial with a 2-car garage and a gas fireplace that ran all afternoon. But Evelyn had a blind spot, and his name was Marcus. Marcus was Laura's older brother, 32 years old, 3 failed startups deep, and permanently convinced he was one investment away from a fortune. He drove a leased SUV he couldn't afford and wore imported leather shoes to family dinners he never paid for. 2 months after Laura and her girls were turned away in the snow, Marcus showed up at Evelyn's kitchen table with a glossy brochure for a high-end logistics business. He needed seed money. Banks wouldn't touch his credit score, so he asked his mother for a favor. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She walked into a local lender and took out a first mortgage on the paid-off house, $65,000 at an adjustable interest rate, and handed the cashier's check straight to her son. She didn't tell Laura. She didn't call to ask how her granddaughters were surviving the Ohio winter in a studio apartment. Instead, she signed her name on the dotted line, shoved the repayment schedule into a kitchen drawer, and assumed the future would take care of itself. By spring, the first late payment notice arrived in her mailbox. Marcus's freight brokering business lasted 11 months. He spent $20,000 on a custom website, leased 2 diesel trucks he didn't have drivers for, and paid himself a generous salary while the company bled cash. When the initial loan money evaporated, Marcus didn't close shop. He drove over to Elm Street on a Sunday afternoon, ate roast beef at Evelyn's dining room table, and blamed the economy. He told her he just needed a bridge loan to cover operating costs until his accounts receivable cleared. Evelyn didn't ask to see a balance sheet or a 1099 form. She signed off on a secondary line of credit against the equity in the house. While Evelyn was signing loan modifications, Laura was sitting for her professional certification exams. She passed the state underwriting boards on her first attempt. By year 3, she had moved from junior processor to associate underwriter at a mid-sized commercial lending firm in Columbus. Her salary jumped to $62,000, but her daily routine barely changed. She moved the girls out of the apartment above the laundromat and into a quiet, ground-floor 2-bedroom near a solid public elementary school. She bought 2 heavy winter coats from a Sears outlet and replaced the rusted sedan with a reliable Honda Civic. Every spare dollar went into an emergency fund or a 401k. At work, Laura earned a reputation for being polite, thorough, and completely unshakable. She didn't chat at the break-room coffee machine about her weekends, and she never brought up her family. When loan officers tried to push questionable commercial packages across her desk, she didn't argue or raise her voice. She simply circled the inflated income projections in red ink, cited the federal lending guidelines, and pushed the folder back. Her coworkers called her ice cold. Her regional manager called her the most accurate risk analyst in the district. By year 4, Laura was promoted again, this time to senior underwriter handling multi-million-dollar commercial portfolios. She sat in a quiet office on the 8th floor, evaluating corporate debt structures with the same steady, expressionless focus she had used at her kitchen table. That same year, interest rates began to climb across the country. That was when the adjustable rate mortgage on Evelyn's Colonial reset. The monthly payment on Elm Street jumped by $450 overnight. At the same time, the county auditor reassessed property taxes across the district, adding another $3,000 a year to Evelyn's bill. Because Evelyn hadn't set up an escrow account to handle the taxes, the county slapped a formal tax lien on the property. Marcus stopped answering his mother's phone calls. He moved to Tampa with a new girlfriend, changed his number, and left Evelyn with 2 defaulted business lines, an unpaid county tax assessment, and a primary mortgage that accumulated compounding late fees by the 15th of every month. Evelyn tried to cover the minimums using her monthly Social Security deposit, but the basic math failed. Her total outstanding debt swelled to $85,000. Unopened envelopes from collection agencies piled up on the kitchen counter next to the toaster, their 800 numbers ringing 3 times a day on her caller ID while she let them go to voicemail. Still, Evelyn refused to believe she was in real trouble. In her mind, banks were run by reasonable people, and reasonable people made allowances for respectable widows who had lived on the same street for 30 years. She didn't know that her local lender had just been swallowed up by First Central Commercial, the largest lending institution in the tri-state area. She also didn't know that 3 weeks after the merger, First Central's executive committee had named a new senior vice president of underwriting to clean up their distressed asset division. A county process server knocked on Evelyn's front door on a rainy Tuesday morning and handed her a thick manila envelope. Inside was a mandatory summons for an in-person debt restructuring audit downtown and a warning that failure to appear would trigger an immediate sheriff's sale. Evelyn set the paper on her kitchen counter, smoothed down her skirt, and told herself it was just a misunderstanding. Evelyn spent that Thursday morning getting ready like she was going to a church luncheon. She put on her navy blue Sunday suit, clipped on her silver earrings, and sprayed a little too much hairspray around her bangs. On the kitchen counter, next to the unpaid county tax notices, sat the manila folder containing 5 years of financial wreckage. She didn't bother looking through the numbers. She didn't think she needed to. In Evelyn's world, rules were for people who didn't know how to speak politely. She still believed a nice smile, a clean dress, and a story about a son's temporary business trouble would be enough to get a 6-month extension and a waived late fee. She drove downtown, annoyed that she had to pay $4 to park in the garage across from First Central Commercial's regional headquarters. The building was 22 stories of dark glass and limestone. Evelyn walked through the revolving doors into a lobby that smelled of floor polish and cold air. She approached the security desk, pulled the summons out of her purse, and slid it across the marble counter. The guard scanned the barcode on the top right corner of the page. He didn't direct her toward the open-plan cubicles on the mezzanine where retail customers negotiated overdraft fees. Instead, he printed a visitor badge, pointed toward the private elevator bank on the far side of the lobby, and told her to scan her card for the 14th floor. Up on the 14th floor, there were no promotional brochures for checking accounts or displays for seasonal CD rates. The hallway was lined with sound-dampening wool carpet and frosted glass doors. This was the Distressed Asset and Corporate Resolution Division, the end of the line for loans that had failed every standard recovery effort. Evelyn took a seat in the waiting room. She checked her watch twice, crossed her ankles, and rehearsed what she was going to say. She planned to mention how long she had banked in the city, how her late husband had been a respected member of the Rotary Club, and how the current economy had been unfair to young entrepreneurs like Marcus. She didn't know that 3 doors down the hall, a file labeled Evelyn Miller, Parcel 402E, Non-Performing Residential and Commercial Blanket, was sitting open on a walnut desk. Behind that desk sat Laura. 5 years of 70-hour weeks and evening certification classes had stripped away the hesitant title clerk who once lived above a laundromat. Laura wore a dark tailored suit and a simple steel watch. Her office was immaculate. 2 computer monitors showing amortization schedules, a stack of pending foreclosure authorizations, and a brass nameplate that read, Laura Miller, Senior Vice President of Underwriting. She didn't have personal photos on her desk. She didn't have motivational quotes on the wall. She had county tax records, property appraisal algorithms, and federal banking compliance codes. Earlier that morning, Laura had pulled the schedule for the day's mandatory restructuring hearings. When she saw the Elm Street address on the docket, her hands didn't shake. Her pulse didn't spike. She didn't call down to HR to recuse herself, and she didn't ask her assistant to reschedule. She simply pulled the physical file from the records cart, opened the manila cover, and ran the math. The numbers told a simple, brutal story. A primary mortgage that had been refinanced into a subprime adjustable rate. A secondary commercial line of credit with no income verification. 3 years of unpaid municipal property taxes that had triggered a county lien. And $85,000 in total outstanding debt against a property whose market value had dropped by 15%. At 10:14, Laura's desk phone chimed once. Ms. Miller, her assistant said over the intercom, your 10:15 restructuring appointment is here. Laura closed the folder, squared the edges against her desk, and looked toward the frosted glass door. Send her in, Laura said. The frosted glass door opened, and Evelyn walked into the corner office with her purse clutched in both hands and her Rotary Club smile already in place. She looked past the desk toward the window first, taking in the view of the downtown skyline and the gray river below. Then she turned her attention to the desk. Her smile dropped. Laura sat 30 inches away, hands folded over an open manila binder. She didn't stand up. She didn't reach across the desk for a hug, and she didn't say hello. Evelyn blinked hard, her eyes darting from Laura's face to the brass nameplate next to the monitor, then back again. For 3 seconds, neither of them said a word. The only sound in the office was the quiet, even hum of the 14th floor heating vent. Laura, Evelyn's voice was thin. She took half a step forward, then stopped. What are you doing in this office? Please have a seat, Ms. Miller, Laura said. The tone wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter or sarcastic. It was the flat, measured voice of a senior banking official conducting a 10:15 appointment. Evelyn didn't sit. She gripped the back of the leather guest chair, her knuckles turning pale against the dark wood. Her confusion quickly soured into old, familiar entitlement. I don't know what kind of joke this is, Evelyn said, her voice rising an octave. I came here to speak with the loan manager about my house, not to play games with you. Where is the supervisor? Laura didn't blink. She unclasped her hands, picked up a silver pen, and tapped the top corner of the file in front of her. I am the Senior Vice President of Distressed Asset Resolution for First Central Commercial, Laura said. Every non-performing residential portfolio in Cuyahoga County with a balance over $50,000 requires my signature before it moves to sheriff's sale. Your file was flagged for mandatory review last Tuesday. Sit down, please. Evelyn stood frozen for another moment. She looked at Laura's tailored gray jacket, the two computer screens displaying columns of loan identification numbers, and the thick stack of legal notices stamped. First Central Legal Department. Slowly, Evelyn pulled the chair out and sat down. Her navy blue Sunday suit suddenly looked dated under the crisp office lights. Laura, listen to me, Evelyn said, leaning forward and trying for a confidential maternal tone. You know how hard things have been. Your brother Marcus had some bad luck with the logistics company. The fuel prices went up and the contracts didn't clear in time. It was just a temporary cash flow problem. All I need is a 6-month forbearance on the principal and an agreement to waive the late fees. Laura didn't answer her. She turned the first page of the binder and slid a document across the walnut desk. It was the original promissory note from the first mortgage modification, dated 4 years earlier. In October, Laura said, her finger tracing the bottom line, you signed an adjustable rate second mortgage for $65,000 at 8.25% interest. The loan terms explicitly stated that the rate would adjust to prime plus 4% after 36 months. I didn't read all the fine print, Evelyn said, waving her hand dismissively. The man at the branch said we could refinance whenever we wanted. You didn't qualify for a refinance, Laura said calmly. She slid a second sheet across the desk, a formal statement of tax delinquency from the county auditor. Because you stopped paying your property taxes 3 years ago, you currently owe $11,400 in back taxes and municipal assessments. The county filed a senior lien against Elm Street on November 4th. Evelyn's face flushed red. I was helping your brother. That's what families do. We support each other when times are hard. The bank doesn't lend on family support, Ms. Miller, Laura said. The bank lends on verified income and debt-to-income ratios. Laura tapped a button on her keyboard, and the printer on the credenza behind her hummed to life. A single sheet of paper slid out into the tray. Right now, Laura said, your monthly fixed income from Social Security is $1,420. Your current minimum monthly obligation on the primary mortgage, the secondary line of credit, and the tax escrow reimbursement is $2,860. Evelyn stared at the paper as Laura laid it between them. That puts your debt-to-income ratio at 201%, Laura said. Federal banking regulations prohibit any lending institution from extending forbearance to a borrower with a ratio above 43%, without verified secondary collateral. Collateral, Evelyn's voice cracked. She gripped the edge of the desk. It's my house, Laura. It's the house you grew up in. You can't sit there with a calculator and let them take it away from me. Evelyn leaned across the walnut desk, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the wood. The Rotary Club smile was completely gone now, replaced by a desperate, open panic. You have the authority to override this, Evelyn said, her voice shaking. I know how banks work. Executives sign off on exceptions all the time. You can put a hold on the sheriff's sale. You can give me 12 months to let Marcus get back on his feet and pay off the junior lien. Laura didn't reach for her keyboard. She didn't look at the clock on the wall, and she didn't raise her voice. Marcus isn't going to pay off the junior lien, Laura said. His Florida company dissolved 3 weeks ago. He filed for Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy in Hillsborough County last Friday. Evelyn stopped talking. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He didn't list the Elm Street loan on his filing, Laura continued, her voice as flat and even as a weather report. Because his name isn't on the promissory note, yours is. You took the 78% debt-to-income debt load entirely onto your own Social Security number, which means the personal liability stops with you. No, Evelyn whispered. She sank back into the leather chair, her navy blue skirt wrinkling around her knees. No, Marcus wouldn't do that. He told me the business was turning the corner. Laura didn't argue about Marcus. She didn't remind Evelyn about the winter morning on the porch, the 2 freezing little girls, or the 5 years of studio apartments and clearance rack groceries. She didn't need to. The papers on the desk were already doing the work. First Central Commercial is audited by the Office of the Controller of the Currency, Laura said. She picked up a silver pen and uncapped it. Under federal banking guidelines, any residential asset carrying a 78% debt-to-income ratio with 90 days of delinquent municipal taxes is legally classified as non-recoverable. Laura, please, Evelyn said. Tears finally spilled over her mascara, tracing thin dark lines down her cheeks. Where am I supposed to go? If they take Elm Street, I don't have enough savings for first and last month's rent on an apartment. I don't have anywhere else. Laura looked across the desk at her mother. Her face showed no anger, no triumph, and no pity. It was the exact same quiet, unshakable composure she had carried down the icy driveway 5 years ago. She pulled the primary foreclosure authorization form to the center of her blotter. It's not personal, Evelyn, Laura said. It's the underwriting math. With her right hand, Laura initialed the bottom left corner of the page, 3 small, precise letters in black ink. LMM. Then she reached across the corner of her desk, picked up the heavy brass and rubber institutional stamp, and pressed it firmly onto the center of the order. The mechanical clack of the stamp echoed in the quiet 14th floor office. In bold, red capital letters, the ink read, "Foreclosure proceedings authorized, and when eligible for forbearance, transfer to legal." Laura closed the manila folder, squared the edges against the wood, and slid it to the right side of her desk into the outgoing courier tray. The county sheriff's office will mail the formal notice of public auction by certified post on Monday, Laura said. You will have 45 days from the date of postmark to vacate the premises or arrange alternative housing. I recommend you contact the City Senior Housing Authority this afternoon. Their office is on the 3rd floor of the municipal building across the street. Evelyn sat motionless in the leather chair for nearly a full minute. She looked at the red ink bleeding through the top sheet of the outgoing tray, then looked up at Laura's face. She was waiting for an argument. She was waiting for Laura to yell, to bring up the past, to give her something, anything, she could push against or manipulate. But there was nothing to push against. There was only a clean desk, a closed file, and a bank executive waiting for her next appointment. Slowly, Evelyn stood up. She picked up her purse, her hands trembling so badly she dropped her car keys onto the wool carpet. She bent down, scooped them up without looking Laura in the eye, and walked toward the frosted glass door. She didn't say goodbye. She pulled the door open, stepped out into the quiet hallway, and let it click shut behind her. Laura didn't watch her go through the glass. She reached toward her intercom, pressed the silver button, and spoke to her assistant. "Send in the 1045, please," Laura said. 45 days after that 14th floor meeting, the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department held its regular Tuesday morning foreclosure auction on the steps of the county courthouse downtown. Elm Street was listed on the auction docket as Parcel 402E. There were no bidders from the neighborhood, and no family members showed up to contest the sale. A regional property management group bought the brick colonial for $112,000, just enough to clear First Central's primary mortgage balance, satisfy the municipal tax lien, and cover the county's closing fees. Evelyn moved into a subsidized 1-bedroom apartment in a senior housing complex 3 miles east of the interstate. The building had beige linoleum hallways, coin-operated laundry machines on the ground floor, and a radiator system that clanked every time the boiler kicked on. Her monthly Social Security deposit covered her rent and her basic groceries, leaving her with about $80 in her checking account at the end of every month. Marcus never called from Tampa. He didn't send money to help her hire a moving van, and he never invited her down to Florida for Christmas. 2 weeks after the sheriff's deed on Elm Street was recorded at the courthouse, Laura sat at a very different table across town. She was in a private conference room at a title settlement agency in suburban Westlake, looking over a 2-inch stack of closing documents. In front of her was the deed to a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac, with mature maple trees and a fenced 1/4-acre backyard. The purchase price was $240,000. Laura put 20% down in cashier's checks, money saved from 5 years of performance bonuses, strict budgets, and discount grocery runs, and locked in a 15-year fixed mortgage at 3.5% interest. When the escrow officer handed her the brass keys across the table, Laura didn't celebrate or make a speech. She just put the keys into her coat pocket, thanked the officer, and drove to pick up her daughters from school. The girls were 9 and 11 now. They didn't remember much about the freezing morning on Evelyn's porch, but they remembered the vibrating floorboards above the laundromat and the bubble wrap taped over the drafty windows. That afternoon, Laura pulled into the paved driveway of the Westlake house and unlocked the front door. The heat was running at a steady 70 degrees. The hardwood floors were clean and warm, and through the sliding glass patio doors, the afternoon sun spilled across a backyard big enough for a garden and a wooden swing set. Over the weekend, Laura and the girls unloaded boxes from the back of the Civic and set up 2 new full-sized beds in 2 separate upstairs bedrooms. For dinner on Saturday night, they didn't eat day-old clearance bread or generic macaroni. They ordered 3 large pizzas from the shop down the street and ate on paper plates at a real oak dining table. After the girls went upstairs to sleep, Laura stood alone by the kitchen sink. She looked out the window at the snow beginning to settle over the backyard lawn. She didn't feel guilty, and she didn't feel angry. She had never raised her voice to her mother, never sent an angry letter, and never asked for an apology. She had simply let the math do what math always does. Would you have signed off on the foreclosure, or would you have given your mother one last chance to save the house? If stories like this one are your kind of thing, don't forget to subscribe. This is Casterly Payback, and we'll see you in the next one.